Now is George Zimmerman's attorney, Mark O'Meara. Mark, welcome to you. First of all, congratulations on your victory, because from a legal point of view, I thought you, particularly you personally, waged an extremely good defence of your client, and you got the result that obviously he wanted.
Thank you.
And it'd be churlish to say otherwise. In terms of Rachel Gentile, I found it a fascinating interview last night on many levels. But one that struck me was, if that personality had been in court on the stand testifying in the way she spoke to me, would it have been more worrying for you? Would she have been more engaging to the jury? And would she have told us more about the other side of Trayvon Martin that I don't think we really heard in that case?
I'm not sure how she would have presented herself, but certainly last night she was more engaging, more straightforward, more amiable. And I'm not sure why she started out with the attitude that she obviously did in the trial, but certainly some of what she could have said was lost on the jury through the attitude.
She painted a very different picture of Trayvon Martin to the one that was repeatedly rammed home during the trial. She talked to somebody who was pretty quiet, a soft sort of character. She said he took a bit of weed twice a week, but nothing that ever changed his personality from what she saw. Somebody that loved his mum, loved his family, and somebody from her understanding of the conversation on that fateful last night was on his way home. What do you make of that aspect of what she was saying?
I'm not sure that we'll fully know. Trayvon Martin was a 17-year-old teenager. Like most of us, we went through those teenage years, and I think he had a whole range of personality traits, of emotions and whatever. I do know that for the 4 minutes that he had after he said he was running, that there was 4 minutes before the altercation took place, and for whatever reason, misinterpreting George's signals, being worried or afraid or whatever, or being angry, he decided to re-engage in a situation where George Zimmerman ended up with all the injuries and Trayvon Martin ended up dead, an event that everybody would like to see changed. But I have to suggest that there's arguments on both sides as to who's really responsible for it.
Let me throw some devil's advocate questions at you about this. The stuff that a lot of people are asking and saying and pondering post this acquittal. One is, where were Trayvon Martin's rights to self-defense in all this? If he did throw the first blow against George Zimmerman because he was scared, why should that be the criteria for George Zimmerman escaping any kind of punishment when he shoots him dead?
Sure. Our self-defense laws are pretty clear and actually give us good reason and signals and an answer to your question. You are allowed to resist force with like force. So if I scream at you, if I curse at you, you can scream back and you can yell back. You can't punch me, you can't shoot me, and you can't take a knife to me. So even if we were to presume what people want us to believe as to George Zimmerman's aggressiveness or following him and say that George confronted him, even if that were absolutely true, Trayvon Martin still did not have the legal right to attack George Zimmerman physically. And when he upped the ante by doing that, he caused a cascading round of events that ended up leading to his own death.
What I was struck by in the trial was that the cascading series of events from a legal perspective really only start when the physical confrontation begins, whereas logic, to me, dictates that it should have started earlier, when George Zimmerman's driving along and sees Trayvon Martin and gets out of his vehicle and calls the authorities, etc., etc. But none of that seemed to be relevant in terms of the law. Is that an area where the law could possibly be reviewed and possibly changed?
A couple of answers. The prosecutor certainly tried to make a great deal about that pre-altercation conversation and all that. So in one sense, it was talked about and discussed, and we have to look at it again sort of in context as to what was going on. And here's the other consideration I'm thinking we need to have. There's this intersection between what George Zimmerman can do as an involved citizen, watching somebody who he's concerned about. We all do that every day. When does it get to the point where George Zimmerman's events or actions turn from a concerned citizen into something that was over the line? It seems as though it really only got over the line after that 4 minute of silence of Trayvon Martin, and there was a minute and a half of silence of George Zimmerman, where we don't know exactly what happened, but it ended up in the physical altercation.
Should he not, when he was told, we don't need you to do that, just turned around and got back in his car? And if he had done that, or had he stayed in his car originally completely, do you accept that that would not have led to the catalyst of events that led to the shooting?
No question. We can look back now and think that there were 1,000 decision points, none of which, of course, back then were significant to the actors deciding them. But we can look back now and say there's 1,000 decision points. But if we look at what did happen and the natural consequence of it, it's hard to say that any individual by George Zimmerman was so wrong that he should be responsible criminally for what happened afterwards.
I want to play one of the more contentious things that Rachel said to me. This is about what she said Trayvon was telling her on the phone and why they feared perhaps what George Zimmerman may be doing. There was no doubt in your mind from what Trayvon was telling you on the phone about the creepy ass cracker and so on, that he absolutely believed that George Zimmerman, this man, you didn't know who he was at the time, but this man was pursuing him.
Yes.
And he was freaked out by it.
Yes. Definitely after I say it might be a rapist. For every boys or every man, who's not that kind of way, see a grown man following them, will they be creeped out? So you gotta take it as a parent, when you tell your child, when you see a grown person follow you, run away and all that, was you gonna stand there? You gonna tell your child to stay there? If you tell your child to stand there, we gonna see your child on the news for missing person.
There's an interesting reaction from the audience there. They clearly empathise with what she was saying. I suppose what I would say is that clearly George Zimmerman was not a rapist. But what it indicated to me was that Trayvon Martin was unnerved, scared possibly. He was a 17-year-old kid. He's got this older guy following him, doesn't know what's going on. And he may well, when they actually came together, we're not entirely sure how that happened, he may well have lashed out in fear. Again, I suppose I come back to, isn't he perfectly entitled to do that under self-defense himself? Why should he lose his life because some guy is following him and he's freaked out by it?
Couple of reasonable reactions. If, in fact, he was that concerned about it, I'm not sure why that never showed up in Rachel Gentel's testimony before the trial. It didn't show up in the initial conversation with Ms. Fulton, didn't show up in the initial conversation with Mr. Delarianda. It only really showed up slightly in a deposition and then in trial testimony. So I'm concerned that that didn't happen before. And if, in fact, Trayvon Martin was that concerned about his safety, let's just say that that was better communicated to Ms. Gentel and was better communicated to the prosecutor, then why in those 4 minutes when he had 80 yards, why did he stay around seemingly in the darkness so that the altercation could actually occur? He could have gone home. And because he didn't, he made the decision not to go home, we have to then look at what might have been in his mind.
George Zimmerman could have gone home.
Absolutely. They both could have. There was 1,000 points when this could have just not happened. And
Anderson Cooper had a fascinating interview with the first juror to break silence. I want to play a clip from this about how confusing they found the law itself.
The law became very confusing.
Yeah, tell me about that.
It became very confusing. We had stuff thrown at us. We had the second-degree murder charge, the manslaughter charge, then we had self-defense, stand your ground.
Did you feel like you understood the instructions from the judge? Because they were very complex.
That was our problem. I mean, it was just so confusing what went with what and what we could apply to what.
I mean, it was confusing. It was complicated, you know, and credit to the jury for taking a long period of time to work this out. In terms of what we do now, because the trial's done, the verdict has been concluded, and we have to respect that verdict. Even if people don't agree with it, they will have to respect it, I think. We move on to the future. Eric Holder today, the Attorney General, came out and said he's very against the stand your ground law. Tell me the difference in simple terms between stand your ground, which you didn't in the end use as a defence here, and the normal self-defence law, which is applicable all over America.
Easiest way to say it is that if you come at me right now with a knife from where you are, under a normal self-defense law, I have to try and get out of the way. I have to retreat. And if I can, great. If I can't, because my back's up against the wall, then I can react with deadly force. In a stand-your-ground situation, they take away my need to retreat. As long as I'm not doing anything wrong, I don't have to retreat. You come at me with a knife from here, I can take out my gun and shoot you. That can be very problematic because it allows the person to not try the last chance out. Now, George didn't have that opportunity in his case, but the statute is troublesome in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it's troublesome because, you know, gang leaders are using it against each other to say, hey, I came face to face with a rival gang member and I shot him. He was going to shoot me. That's the problem with it. I mean, it seems to me an utter farce. I'm totally with Eric Holder on this. In terms of self-defense as a law, in light of what happened in this case, and you defend many people, and, you know, I'll make it clear, you defend many young black teenagers. You've done that before in the past as well. Are there changes to the self-defense law, do you think, that we should now consider as a result of all this?
Traditional self-defense, no. I think it works perfectly. It's been around for literally almost 1,000 years. And what it really says is when confronted with force, you're allowed to react. You punch me, I can punch you. You yell at me, I can yell at you. You take a knife out, I can take a knife out, or maybe even a gun. So that doesn't need to change. The stand your ground issue, which allows, you know, again, a voluntary action that may not be necessary, is, again, as we talked about, troubling. But self-defense itself, it has to be there for us to be able to protect ourselves.
Final question, briefly, if you don't mind. How is George Zimmerman? And do you think he'll ever be able to lead a normal life, given all the mayhem that's erupted around this trial?
He'll never be able to just walk down the street and not worry who's going to hate him next. His concern about, he really wanted this trial, and he also wanted to testify because he wanted to give his side and say to America and to his jury why he had to do what he had to do. But regardless of that, the outpouring of anger and hatred that has shown up after a verdict of not guilty just is more troublesome for him. He'll never have a normal life. I think he'll always be in hiding because we never know how that one person who has unreasonable anger may act out on it.
Mark O'Meara, I thought you did an exceptional job in that trial, and you've always been very good to this show and very considerate to deal with, and I appreciate it very much.
Sure.
Good to see you.